Hello, hello. I haven't been doing any live interviews or broadcasts for Vineyard North or just for my own, enjoyment. But Mike, thanks for jumping back on. We're jumping into a controversy that has kind of been blown up my social media streams. And this is, why are people deconstructing faith? And this is something that you and I, are kind of familiar with. And there's several people at our church, Vineyard North, here in Grand Rapids, that are dealing with or thinking through. But just a couple of days ago, a guy that I kind of know but don't know personally, he tweeted this and then wrote a whole kind of essay about the 4 causes of deconstruction, where he talks about how people deconstruct because of church hurt, about kind of egocentric pastors who have kind of blown up their churches and how they've left hurt because of that, because of poor teaching that has maybe caused problems with their faith. The third reason is the desire to sin. Fourth reason is street cred. And Joshua Ryan Butler, he kind of wrote this, and there's been quite a bit of, well, I think a lot of people said, well, yeah, this is why people are deconstructing. And then other people said, kind of, no, this is totally missing the mark. And so I wanted to kind of walk through these 4 reasons and get your feedback. Is that all right?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Just so everybody knows, I totally sprung this on Mike. So he is just going to fly by the seat of his pants. So the first one is this idea that people have been hurt by the church. And he says that, yeah, it's unfortunate that people have been wounded or hurt by bad leadership. But the cure for church trauma is to learn how to lament. And that deconstruction isn't that. Deconstruction is something else. And so if people would learn how to lament, that would be a good thing. But too often deconstruction kind of leads them off the rails, to which I have felt, and I know a lot of people have responded, well, this process of deconstruction or this faith crisis is the process of lamenting. Like, people are trying to figure out how to lament. And then my other thought was, maybe the church itself needs to learn how to grieve or lament, that there's a lot of kind of structural issues with the church. It's not just a couple fallen leaders or a couple wounded egos or something like that. But really the whole church is kind of upsetting to all sorts of people. And that the church, maybe if the church confessed and repented a little, other people wouldn't be deconstructing their faith so much. So that was my first kind of thought when I saw that this idea of church hurt, is it really wasn't big enough to explain things. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems to me like he's just trying to boiled everything down to a simple, individual offense, as if we can just, forgive and move, or ought to be able to forgive and move on, or maybe just, pray a lament prayer and be done. Doesn't leave a whole lot of, I mean, lament's certainly a tradition in the Bible, but it doesn't leave a whole lot of space for sort of prophetic correction to the church. And there's some things deeply wrong that are not just goof ups or individual transgressions, but are like systemic problems in the church. So I think he's minimizing it.
Yeah. And I've said in other places, I think people aren't just hurt by the church. Certainly there's like church wounds and there's pain. And he says, we're not good at grief today in our society. Much of deconstruction exists because it's easier to move on than to be sad. And I think, some people probably use deconstruction as an excuse just to kind of give the middle finger to the church and leave. Yeah, maybe. But I think that's kind of dismissing kind of the majority of people. I think that I would actually use the word disgust. I think there's a lot of people kind of disgusted with the church. Like, I'm not sure I want those people to be my people anymore. I don't know who my people are anymore because my people are acting badly. And I'm rethinking this whole situation. Are you kind of feeling that that's the response you're seeing from some people?
Yeah, I heard another pastor use the word betrayal, and
Right.
just and like we feel betrayed, or people increasingly feel betrayed because what they were taught just doesn't seem to line up with what they're learning, and simple answers they were given don't really work in the real world, on a personal level, but just on like a theological level. But even just thinking. Betrayal on the sense that, like, I thought we were trying to move towards Jesus and living like him. And, increasingly it looks like a lot of the churches you see speaking most loudly, covered in the media, whatever, are don't sound a whole lot like Jesus. So there's a sense of like betrayal that I think that's probably better than disgust, because disgust, it's just judgment. And it's more than hurt. There's really like I in a lot of ways feel betrayed.
Right. Well, so I was thinking about this and I wrote it up and kind of posted it already, but I thought this is just these were off the top of my head as I thought, well, yeah, the church, people feel betrayed, like you just said. And maybe the church, at some level, the leadership could take kind of responsibility, like for maybe pursuing political power over faithfulness to Jesus, pursuing church growth, while trading on what I think are oftentimes implicit kind of racist kind of, segregating practices, or maybe promoting certain doctrines, that have been detrimental for the church, or preaching a soul gospel instead of a whole gospel and things like that. So yeah, so you were telling me what you want to drop in that one story about your friend here, or does it go somewhere else? You were telling me this before we press play.
Yeah, no, I think that I think in some ways, like, deconstructive questioning and wrestling with how to understand where we maybe misunderstood or gone wrong or been taught wrongly. I mean, it ought to be a normal part of trying to follow Jesus into living more like him. I mean, we ought to be running into things that in our own life and even in our life communally that just don't reflect him. And I had an experience like that about 5-6 years ago. We had spent the previous 5 years, going back 10 or 12 years, like now, we trying to like love our neighbors, and had heard, our church has heard about that a lot. That just the emphasis on that changed Lauren and I's life. And I quickly began to see just a lot of people outside of faith come into my life, and I started to think, wow, I've really landed on the secret to, leading everybody to Jesus and building a great church in the process, and maybe making great name for myself or something. and
Right.
and 5 years into that, um, I started to look at the lack of fruitfulness, and in particular, there's one neighbor, and I began to realize that as I looked at his life and the sort of meaning and depth and transformation he was looking for in all sorts of other religions, and have other spirituality systems, I just realized, I don't know that my life is that good a news.
Mm.
I've traded sort of being a successful Christian, or pursued that, rather than actually, a successful evangelist, successful like church grower, for just actually devotion to Jesus and becoming like him. And that sent me just on several years of questioning, where did I get off course, and where did I go wrong with this?
Mm.
And in a sense, I suppose it was coming to grips with the betrayal of having bought into a very consumer driven approach to church. Just keep growing it, keep selling the message, keep adding butts and seats, and nickels and noses and those kind of things. I bought into that, and I felt
Right.
both personally a little bit betrayed by others, but mostly just a sense of personal conviction. And maybe that's where the difference is, where deconstruction that's aimed at others can maybe go a little wonky, whereas
Well, I think that gets to the second one. So he talks about, if we go back to here, he talks about how the first thing is church hurt, but the second reason why people deconstruct is, he says, is because of poor teaching. And what does he mean by that? Is he says that some people, they deconstruct because they've been given kind of a poor understanding of Genesis 1, or perhaps because of certain kind of superficial views of why Jesus had to die or something like that. And his answer is, well, instead of deconstructing all this bad teaching, deconstructing all the way down to where now we don't believe in anything, rather we need to be given good teaching, which, as a theology professor, I'm always like, yeah, exactly. But my thought is kind of like what you were saying. Well, it's not just that the teaching, but it's almost like the whole operating system. Like, it's not just that we need better answers within this framework, but many people are actually deconstructing the actual framework. And I think he kind of doesn't get at that. And before you answer your thoughts, Mike, just all of you who are watching live, you can throw in your comments, and then I'll be able to see them, and then we can kind of answer them if you want to make some comments or ask some questions as we go. But so what are the operating systems that I kind of see is that, here's like three or four of them, is that, we've replaced the life of Jesus with like worship of the Bible. And so we like everything is a fight over the Bible instead of how to follow Jesus more closely. So I think that's like an operating system kind of issue is we don't just need better Bible answers. We need better like Jesus practices. We have cognitive individualism that denies community and in the place of emotions is I think we're horrible at understanding the emotional life. Many people, truth be told, are just anti-science. And that's a huge problem for understanding God's presence in the world. And then the last one would be just the elevation of the life of the ideas over love of God and things like that. And so for me, the idea of getting back to better teaching doesn't necessarily get at why people are deconstructing, but also doesn't really answer a good way forward. So what do you think about, you don't have to answer on all that, but what do you think of this idea about good teaching?
Yeah, I think you're right on. And for anybody that doesn't maybe understand all these like operating systems, and I don't think you maybe that makes a lot of sense until you like study the history of like in thought in our culture. But like it does seem like
what I'm trying to say is we're using Microsoft Word when we really need to be using
I get it. So
the Apple
maybe like,
OS. We got to change from Microsoft to Apple. It's that kind of idea. So instead of
let
just
me see if
updating
I
our
can
apps on a
translate it.
Google.
Let me see if I can translate it for the non-PhDs
Okay.
around here, like me. So the modernist kind of operating system is concerned with being right about things.
Right.
And I think what he's saying is, well, sure, the church maybe has been wrong about some things, so we need to get more right and correct our, wrong teachings with right ones. But it doesn't get at this issue of like, it doesn't seem like Jesus is nearly as concerned about us being right as doing and living rightly. And so that would be maybe a change in operating system. Like, I think that's what you're getting at.
Right. That right living leads to right thinking, because so often I think many people have seen that, well, kind of right thinking has led to bad people. And so we don't want that.
And
Good.
you probably know you're running on the modernist operating system if you get really nervous about people having divergent ideas about what the Bible means. And we get, I got to say, before I went to seminary, I felt anxious all the time about people who had different views of the Bible than me. What gave me a lot of peace was realizing that for the first few hundred years that the church existed and didn't really even agree on what went in the Bible, let alone having copies for people to read, it still actually worked. Just trying to live life following Jesus actually worked, maybe better.
Right.
So I think there's something there. We have an anxiety about being right that it's part of this operating system of modernity that we live in, the modern world and Western world, that maybe isn't as critical as we think. So I don't think we can just fix our teachings or maybe solve some of the things that I remember that happening to me in college. There were things I discovered, like the Bible seems to contradict itself in different places, and the modern answer is to no, it doesn't. See if we like work this around here and this way and that, and read a little more, like then we can make it all harmonize.
Right.
And I think people are wrestling with the fact that maybe it doesn't all harmonize, and that's okay.
That's a radical statement. Well, let's go to the next one. Number 3 is people deconstruct out of a desire to sin. This blew up certainly one part of my Facebook and online streams.
I bet.
So he says that the third reason for some people, he doesn't say everybody, but for some people deconstructing is out of a desire to justify their sin. As a pastor, Butler notes that he just notes how often intellectual deconstruction often coincides with the development of personal sin. Maybe there was an affair, an addiction. He ministers to a lot of college students, and all of a sudden they're sleeping with their boyfriend and girlfriend. Oh, and now I have all these questions about God now. And he says, is it really that they're deconstructing faith, or is it that they're just trying to justify with their minds what their hearts want to do? And so people kind of lost their minds that this is kind of blaming of the victim. People are outraged that this is shifting the focus away from kind of the cultural, social sins of the church and just kind of focusing on individual sins and perpetuating a culture of purity and things like that. Before I give you some of my thoughts, what do you think about that answer, Mike? Or that,
Well, I mean,
that wondering?
yeah, I've seen it too, and I mean, honestly, it's touched my life really personally. Just watching a close family member go through just like unraveling of, and it's hard to know what came first. Was it like, you know, really making some bad decisions and in life, or was it the questions? Um, and it's hard to know. It was probably a cycle. Um, but I don't know that we can help anyone, or there's a whole lot of hope for anyone, and just saying, pointing fingers on the as the author of this piece seems to be doing. um I mean, you certainly can't reduce legitimate questions, or eliminate those questions just by calling into question people's motives.
Right, right. What I always kind of want to think, you know, on a two-track parallel, both and kind of, sense, it goes to, since we're part of a charismatic church, I can use this example. Uh, if someone kind of like seems to be possessed, like demonically or something like that, like certainly I'll pray for their deliverance. But if I know that they went off their, bipolar meds, I'll tell them to get back on them. Right. We can have a spiritual causation as well as a physical, and I think the same is true for questions of deconstruction. Like, yeah, there's legitimate questions. There's betrayal that people are dealing with. And maybe there's also sin or some kind of loosening of moral standards that they'd like to pursue or something like that. And we don't know which one comes first, but I do think it's pastorally irresponsible just to assume that, everything is always intellectual, or that, it's always out there that the problem is. When it comes to deconstruction, I think, people do struggle with addictions and anger and, all sorts of things. And that, leads them away from God. We're in a cultural moment now where, when you're far from God, it's, well, because I'm deconstructing, or it's because the church has screwed it up, or, but sometimes pastorally, maybe we do need to say, well, what is the shape or structure of your current life? Like, what does that look like? And would that lend itself to finding God at all? And so I think this is where my more progressive leaning friends, I think might get upset. So, but those are some of my thoughts there. What do you
Yeah,
think?
you said something a couple of years ago when we started talking deconstruction. You just said, I think quite often deconstruction, I don't want to misquote you, but like,
I'm sure it was
when
brilliant.
when
Just
people start
stunning them.
asking these questions, they often start just trying out living as a non-believer, and a non-follower of Jesus, and so that caused me to think, I hope we can make space in the church for people to continue practices that bring life, whether it's like confession of sin, or the Eucharist, or just being with people we wouldn't choose. I hope that we can make space for people to do that while they question, because one of the old modernist operating system problems that I've noticed is this idea that, you've said this, like, we don't think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking. And so the idea that, you can go and spend a few years questioning everything without that affecting your total life is just naivety.
Mhm.
It's a modernist naivete that, like, I can live as in a totally different way. And I've seen this in my own life. Like, the more I remain in a just sort of skeptical journey in life, the more I'm formed into a skeptical person.
Right. Right.
Um, and
We
it's
got,
just not somewhere you'd want to live.
yeah, well, we are what we pay attention to. You know, we become the things that we're like focused on, for sure. And I've kind of come to this conviction, I think you're the same too, is, you know, if somebody is struggling with deconstruction, you know, I want to answer their questions, but I'm also want to challenge the kind of overly cognitive view that they're taking toward life. You know, all of your life is not about ideas. I also don't want to, you know, say, well, actually everything that's important about your life is your sin. Right. And so neither of those options are really great. And I've heard someone say, you know, it's, if someone's deconstructing or having doubts, like you probably don't need to sit them down with, you know, a Christian philosopher to have all their questions answered. You probably need them to go hang out with a Mother Teresa. And so instead of just attacking people's sins or answering all their questions, maybe get, you know, maybe we need to do the things Jesus did. We need to practice hospitality to the strangers. We need to take care of the poor and oppressed, and then find out if those questions are as important as we thought they were, or find out if maybe we're finding God in our life again in ways that we didn't used to. And I think that those things are kind of important. We need to kind of take a different turn there. The last thing he said, and I don't have much comment on this, is like people are looking for street cred. They're kind of blending into the demands of culture. And he's talking about high profile kind of deconversion stories of, you know, celebrities and things like that, and how they just want to kind of fit in, you know, and I don't know about stars and movie stars and whatnot, but I don't know if that's really kind of a major motivator for a lot of people deconstructing outside of the other ones and many that we've talked about before. Do you have any thoughts on that one? Or
Yeah, I mean, it seems a lot like just trying to blame people for a problem that's not going away. And and yet, um, I think we need to be honest that there is something appealing about holding on to doubt and skepticism as just like a permanent way of life. There is something in that for us, and I talked with a fellow the other day about this, and just asked him to think about it. Like, is there any? Are you really searching for answers? Because I think there's some pretty good, guides and sages you could like read and follow, and really sort some of this stuff. Um, or is there an appeal to being a permanent skeptic? Um, and he agreed, like there probably is, and I need to do some like long soul searching on that. Um, so I think there probably are things that keep us attached to that. It's kind of scary to reach convictions, and certainly to share them with others, and have to face being wrong, or um, push back on our convictions. So in some
right.
ways, it's a bit safer, and maybe more maybe more. I could see in that way. Maybe there's a sort of an attraction we have to the aesthetic of
Sure, sure.
skepticism.
Sure. Well, I think in a world, like you said, of modern fundamentalism where we're certainty seekers, we feel like we have to balance all that certainty with more doubt. Um, when I think that that's still just kind of playing kind of in this modern world, you know, where we have to have everything's figured out. But really, if we believe in relationships, God's a relational being, you know, then that takes trust and that takes confidence in some way. You don't have certainty, but you don't get far in a relationship if all you're doing is doubting the other person and all their motives constantly. And so can we move into like a new place of seeking and of pursuing? So that's what we're trying to do, you know, at our church. That's what I know you're trying to do. I'm trying to do in our own lives and all of our other pursuits. So, well, thanks for
Yeah.
jumping on for just a couple minutes as I spring this on you. And thank you all for listening and jumping on with us.